Hey, Montel Williams here. Look, I've got some incredible news to share with you. I want to tell you about my brand new book that's coming out that's called The Sailing of the Intrepid. Now, this book is more than just an historical account. It's a tribute to the brave men who served aboard the USS Intrepid and a celebration of their extraordinary legacy. Writing this book was such an incredible story, and I'm really thrilled to be able to share it with you. So don't wait to grab your little piece of history. The book is available right now to order. You can go to montelmedia.com, and you can even get a limited autograph signed copy. Now, thank you so much for your support. I can't wait for you to read this incredible story of the sailing of the Intrepid. I'll see you on the pages. Hey guys, welcome. Thanks so much for being a part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel, the podcast where we have real, honest conversations about cannabis, the culture, and everything in between. I'm your host, Montel Williams, and today we've got an incredible guest who's not only redefining how we experience cannabis, but is also leading the charge in cannabis education and advocacy. Joining me today is Shawn Sherman, the founder and owner of Golden Apple Cannabis Co. Shawn's journey is nothing short of fascinating, from his roots in the tech world as an ethical hacker to becoming a respected voice in cannabis policy and innovation. Shawn is on a mission to change the way that we think about cannabis. Shawn, welcome, and thank you so much for being a part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel today, sir.
Thank you, Montel. It was a great intro, and thank you very much for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in. You've got such a unique background, starting in computer science and offensive security, and now you're running a boutique cannabis company. That's quite a big career pivot. Can you tell us a little bit about how you made that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. I think ultimately, I think it comes down to curiosity, right? I got into the offensive computer security world. Basically, it's a different way of saying being a hacker, right? I was a white hat hacker where, companies would pay me to break into computer systems and networks. In turn, I would churn their results over to their security team and they'd plug the holes.
Wow.
And so, yeah, what got me into that, I guess, right, is just a curiosity of computers, but also personal empowerment, right? For me, it wasn't just a job. It was even in that field, it was more kind of a personal mission. And, I've always been into cannabis, like a lot of us, I suppose, starting out as a teenager, experiencing cannabis. And as I started doing more research with computers and just getting more of a science background, the cannabis journey, I kind of was always piggybacking along with that. And, cannabis is a weird space, right? Because we're coming out of prohibition and the cannabis industry or scientists weren't allowed necessarily to do a lot of research. So as we're coming out, there's just so much great research and knowledge, being discovered about cannabis. And I often tell people that these days I'm almost seeing more a faster paced change in cannabis than what I did in the IT world, previously. So it's been quite interesting.
And how's that background, that ethical hacking background, influenced the way that you approach Golden Apple Cannabis?
Yeah, so I think it's very detail orientated. I think that being a hacker, of course, you have to kind of understand how things work to a great degree, and also sort of how things don't work. And that's sort of what I've noticed in the cannabis industry. As an example, I think that there's a lot of verbiage that is still being used today that, frankly, I think is not correct. So, kind of learning the cannabis, verbiage, phytochemical constituents, etc., and just trying to get an understanding of where we are with these, culturally as an understanding. And, from the consumer perspective, from the industry perspective, from a policymaker perspective. So, and I think, the hacking industry might hopefully kind of help me out a little bit, trying to navigate some of these, different rules, and try to also help explain and interpret some of the different some of these loopholes and some of these big gaps in knowledge.
Gotcha. Well, it's always inspiring to hear about people who take their skills and then apply them to something, else that really, helps them move a different industry forward. And it's something that you seem to be very passionate about. So speaking of passion, let's talk about Golden Apple Cannabis Company. And you're doing something really innovative by moving away from traditional sativa indica classifications. Can you break that down? That's something I've talked about now for years because, majority of people don't understand that when they walk into a dispensary these days and say, well, I want to have an indica or I want to have a sativa, what they really are getting is hybrids, period, no matter what, because we've hybridized this so much by crossbreeding. So talk a little bit about what you're working on there.
Yeah. So a big difference between what we're doing is you're absolutely correct. We don't necessarily use these terms sativa indica hybrid. We have different effect categories for our products, 6 different effect categories, energy, inspiration, focus, calm, relaxation, and comfort. And these categories are based on terpene and cannabinoid profiles in a particular product. And we all understand when someone comes in, let's say a customer walks into a dispensary and they say, I want a sativa. We generally have the understanding that what they're trying to convey is, they want something sort of uplifting and a little bit more energetic. And when someone says, I'm looking for an indica, what they're meaning, I believe, is they want something a bit more sedative, right? And you've probably heard the term that, quote unquote, bud tenders would say, indica is into couch, right? But really it's, that sort of paints, first of all, the term sativa indica, I think, are improperly applied, and we could get into that in a minute. But really, instead of sort of a black, white, and gray for the sativa indica hybrid, I think cannabis is much more like a box of crayons, right? You open it up and there's a lot of different colors that we can play around with in terms of effects and experience, etc. Sativa, Montel, this is kind of a fun fact that I tell people. Sativa is a Latin term and it means cultivated. So cannabis sativa is cultivated cannabis. And that came, this term happened in the early 1700s. The father of taxonomy came up with, Carl Linnaeus came up with a term, cannabis sativa, again, cultivated cannabis. But there's also, and at that time, this is in, Western Europe, he was Swedish. And at that time, Western Europeans only really knew about hemp, right? So when he was talking about cannabis sativa, he was referring to hemp varieties with low THC made for, to make fiber and cloth and, seeds, etc. And then in the later 1700s, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck came along and discovered that in his hands, somebody handed him some hemp from India. And the cannabis from India happened to have THC on it. And it was very, very oily, right? A lot of trichomes on it. And the Indians were using this cannabis for a lot of times religious and therapeutic, reasons. So it had THC on it. So he came along in the late 1700s and classified this as cannabis indica. So in modern taxonomy and ethnobotany is the study of how humans' relationship to plants. So in modern taxonomy and botany, there's this understanding that if we say cannabis sativa, really what we're talking about is hemp. And anything with THC on it comes from India and is really an indica. So that's kind of an interesting dichotomy. So yeah, sativa does not mean uplifting. Sativa does not mean energetic. Sativa does not mean narrow leaf variety. It simply means cultivated. And there are various, like there's lettuce sativa and carrot sativa and cucumber sativa, right? So yeah, again, there's this huge gap between where sort of the science is, and when we talk to people, horticulturalists and botanists, etc., versus where the industry is versus where the consumer, what the consumer understands.
And the majority of that's a problem because the consumer doesn't really understand, because this industry has not done its job in educating the consumer. And that's part of the reason why I think we're as stagnant as we are today, because we are wasting time not educating the consumer as well as we should, because that's really, you take a look at those are the ones who are buying. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of terpenes and cannabinoids in determining the effects of cannabis. Can you explain how some of these compounds work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So terpenes, I like to explain to people that terpenes are basically, it's easy to think of them as essential oils, right? And terpenes are on cannabis, but they're also on every other botanical, every other plant and some insects.
Yeah,
that's right. And they have, a smell and odor, but they also can affect us humans on a physiological level. And, as an example, cannabis has many different terpenes on it based on, depending on the variety of cannabis. And in cannabis, there's typically 6 common or dominant terpenes. And a lot of these terpenes are not only found in cannabis, but also other fruits and vegetables and botanical products.
Correct.
So as an
example,
and they've been around
for. And they, one of the things you should make sure you say this: we have studied, and horticulturists have studied terpenes for 40, 50 years. There's write-ups on terpenes and what they do. A terpene isn't a terpene isn't a terpene. So you might be able to get humulene in a cannabis plant, but you can also get humulene in hops. You can also get some of these other terpenes in various things, and they don't necessarily all have the exact same, what do I call it, medicinal or biological effects in humans. But go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. So as an example, limonene comes from lemon essential oil, basically. And if you were to take lemon essential oil and put it in a diffuser, right, and put it in your room, and it releases this aroma, then we have a physiological effect, right? It's a little bit more uplifting and bright for us, as opposed to if we used lavender essential oil, right? And we put it in the diffuser, it's a bit more calming effect for us. And you're right, this has been studied for a long time. There's, double-blind studies, scientific studies that support this. But it turns out that these molecules are also in cannabis as well, right? So when someone says, I want a sativa or I want an indica, how I translate that internally is, if you're looking for a sativa, in my mind, I think, you're looking for something terpinolene dominant or limonene dominant. And if I hear I'm looking for an indica, in my mind, I interpret that as being, you're looking for something myrcene dominant or beta caryophyllene dominant. And these are terms that most people aren't aware of, but they do understand the concept of energy or comfort. So that's what we try to do, on our products with our classifications. Is try to make it digestible for frankly kind of the normal person, right? If they're not a super geek kind of like us about cannabis, a way that they can digest the information and have a better understanding of what they're taking, and more importantly, that they have some sort of understanding so they can have a more repeatable experience moving forward.
Well, education is key, especially in an industry that's fighting against decades of stigma and misinformation. How do you approach making sure that you educate your customers?
So, not every customer wants to sit down and have an hour-long masterclass, right, about the phytochemicals of cannabis. So it sort of depends on their appetite. So what we do is we have, again, 6 different product categories, and they're associated with a particular color. So as an example, energy is red, calm is orange, comfort is blue. So first of all, somebody could sort of just take a look at the color of the category and have some sort of understanding. Then we have a word attached to it, right? Again, the focus, the energy, etc. And then if you really want to geek out on the packaging and, on the website, when we talk about the products, we have the 3 dominant terpenes. So, I find that generally people have a different appetite. Everybody has different appetite in terms of how much they want to learn about something. So that's our goal, is to try to meet them at wherever they're at in terms of how much they want to learn. And we're always willing to feed them more, if you will, if they have more hunger for knowledge to learn more about it.
Look, I know you've been deeply involved in cannabis policy and advocacy over the years. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work you've done in that space?
Yeah, absolutely, Montel. Most of the advocacy that I've done over the last few years has been on the local level. Where we live is a very conservative area. It's big in ag. We're based in Paso Robles, which is wine country in California, inside of San Luis Obispo County. And for good, bad, or indifferent, I explain to people that cannabis regulation and laws is an extremely partisan issue. And we tend to follow the same line as like the LGBTQ movement. And that's where a lot of the legalization was born from, right? Was, there were patients of AIDS in California, and they were getting a hold of cannabis. And that's really where a lot of the early cannabis advocacy started in our modern movement. That turned into medicinal cannabis, which ultimately turned into legal regulated cannabis.
You're talking back 2001, 2002. Go ahead, keep going.
Yep. And it happened in California, and the movement really started in San Francisco, it's fair to say. And it's a very liberal, progressive place. And, I explain to people that where we are is very conservative, where Golden Apple Cannabis is. And it's, it's been a bit more headwind and challenge than if I was in, let's say, Los Angeles or San Francisco, or even Santa Barbara, that's a bit south of us. I say that, it's difficult to open up a gun shop in San Francisco, right? And it would be difficult to open up an abortion clinic in Alabama. These industries or these businesses or these functions they're partisan issues. So as you're aware of, I know that you've been an advocate for a long time. And, a lot of this starts at grassroots, movements. As an example, in most of the jurisdictions, to legalize cannabis or to have industry, to have a business, to get permitting, etc., you generally have to clear local level permitting first and then go to state permitting. For the local level permitting for us, it took us about, 6 years, all said and done, to get our permit. When it came to the state, it was only a matter of a couple of months, really, to get the permitting. And we could have been in a different jurisdiction, and we could have gotten the permitting much quicker and been able, allowed to do more things. So yeah, for me personally, a lot of the, I've been involved in medical marijuana task force, for the jurisdiction that we're in. I've been on many different industry associations, but for me, cannabis has always been a grassroots movement and a grassroots, advocacy fight. And, but yeah, I think you have experience with this as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, but doesn't that disappoint you, though, when you look back at 2021, 2022, all the work that was done? I mean, I literally ran all over this country, state after state after state, testifying before Congress and before the legislations, trying to help move this initiative forward. And you would think that now, after 23 years, we would have gotten further, but I am disappointed more in the industry than I am in the legislators who have been fighting against the industry, because we've spent more time fighting each other rather than trying to move this forward. Where do you think we are? First of all, are you happy with where we are today as an industry? I think there's been so many people who've been, got involved in this because they thought this was going to be the green rush and forgot about those that you were talking about, those who were, dragged out of their homes on gurneys with IVs, and just because they were growing a couple plants in their backyard. I mean, we go back and look at the news of the day in 2020 and in 22 and 2000, 2001. I mean, I think a lot of people have forgotten where we came from, and therefore they don't know how we're going to get to where we're going.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I'm not happy where we are as an industry, right? And that's why I think it's important to keep educating people and to keep pushing forward. And yes, and a lot of people complain about the taxes in the regulated market, right? In California, I mean, we're with, by the time the California excise tax, the local tax, the this tax, and that tax, we're close to 25%, tax on a product. But on the other hand, I do enjoy, being in the cannabis industry, and I've been in the cannabis industry for a long time, but now I'm not as worried about waking up with a gun at my house, my front door getting broken down, and, my dog getting shot and waking up with a gun in my face. So we have progressed, but yeah, not nearly as far as what I would have thought 20 years ago, like yourself.
But I'll throw out we progressed, but at the same time, we take 3 steps forward and 10 steps backwards. When we take a look at what's going on around the country right now with, the fact that hemp products that are on sale at gas stations and bodegas with really not a lot of control and not a lot of oversight, and in some ways making the entire industry look bad. People are being thrown into the same barrel as those who are selling the illegal, which are legal products, which are selling, some of these legal products in gas stations and making people sick because, there's no regulation to that crap.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. I think it's just, again, I think it just comes down to education. Like, the consumer doesn't know and I would say this, although California has recently put a ban on these hemp products with THC, these hemp products with THC that you're talking about, that are legal products, they're generally in areas and markets where there's not safe and easy access to regulated cannabis products, right? So therefore, the companies go under this umbrella of quote unquote hemp. And, this is when you see it at the gas stations and these things. And again, to your point, yes, there's little regulation. But most of the consumers don't understand the difference between Delta 8 and Delta 9, or just a THC drink at a gas station versus something that's been regulated. Well, and again, it comes down to there's such a big gap and disparity between where science is and the understanding and where some in industry are and where the end consumer is. That's why I think verbiage is very important. This is why we don't use Sativa Indica hybrid. If we wanted to get really technical about it, again, using those terms, if it has, and one of my heroes is Robert Connell Clark. Him and Martin Merlin wrote the book called Cannabis, Ethnobotany, and Evolution. And, they've come to the conclusion that cannabis with THC started in India. So all of the things that, if it has THC, which is, a large part of our market, what we're looking for, what consumers think of as cannabis, then it's an indica. And all these things, when people say indica now, and they refer to these broadleaf, short, squatty plants that have more sedative effects, those are really Afghani plants. And so I think verbiage is important, because if we're, as an industry, using the incorrect verbiage, then how could we expect the consumer to be informed? How could we expect the voter to be informed? How could we expect the policymakers to be informed? Even such a simple term as strain, right? It's common verbiage to say strain in cannabis. But, I noticed that you had Ethan Russo, again, another hero of mine. He was on your show pretty recently on your podcast.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
he has a saying that strain is a term used for bacteria and viruses, not flowers. Right? So,
Right.
and you wouldn't go to a flower shop and say or talk about roses and say, what strain of roses do you have? We're in wine, where I'm at is in wine country. We don't say, what strain of grapes are those? What strain of wine is that, right? These are varietals, plants or cultivars. So, yeah, I think the industry has not done a good job, both from your point, from sort of the money grabbing point of view and lack of education, but there hasn't been any dissemination of proper cannabis education by the industry to the consumer, and that's, I think, been a big problem.
I think that's the biggest problem that the industry has right now today, because we are not looking the same way, if you will, the same reason why when I walk out of this room and walk out and turn my television on, I'm going to see for the next 45 minutes at least every half hour 3 different pharmaceutical commercials. Those commercials are going to come up and try to tell me, if this feels bad, buy a pill. If this feels bad, buy a pill. But what is pharma doing? They're trying their damnedest to put a little bit of knowledge into the brain of the consumer, so that when they walk into the doctor's office, they can say, I heard about this drug. You know about it? And the doctor's going to reach behind his counter and say, oh, yeah, I got a sample of it right here. We need to do the same amount of education or marketing towards the consumer as Big Pharma does. That's how we're going to get ahead. And I know that in some places, the laws prohibit individual strain education, or I'm using that term, individual cultivar education, but it doesn't prohibit education in general knowledge when it comes to what cannabis is. And, I think we've wasted time not attempting to work around some of the opportunities that we have to educate the consumer, because that's how we're going to drive sales, and that's how we're going to keep people flowing through and keep their product in the marketplace and stop this government from, this whole movement afoot. I mean, I'd like your take on it. What do you think of this idea of, declassifying, changing the classification from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, which really, I think, as an industry, we don't have the slightest, the industry hasn't paid attention to what that's going to really truly mean. If the Fed decides to make this a Schedule 3 drug, whose purview does it fall under? Pharma. If it falls under, not pharma, but the FDA, if it falls under FDA, an organization that has hated the idea of cannabis being normalized since 1937, now all of a sudden they're going to be forced to control what they've hated. And they're going to put so many, if that happens, the same way as we've just watched a federal government put tanks in, the National Guard on the streets of Washington, D.C., believe me, they can do that in every state across this country and shut down every dispensary that operates because you've not gotten approval for the products that are on the shelves. I'm talking extremes, but that's how far they could go to stop this movement.
No, absolutely. Well, and in all fairness, Montel, that's where they were 20 years ago, basically, right? Or 25 years ago. There weren't dispensaries. People were getting shut down. There were police on the streets, right? I mean, the DEA was one of the best funded, policing units, almost like ICE is now. It's a weaponized police unit. But so, yeah, where do I think in terms of scheduling? Like you, I'm sure that we're probably on the same wavelength that cannabis should be descheduled, right? I don't think, yes.
Correct.
But if we look at knocking it down from, from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, I think you're right. We don't know what to expect, and it's very scary.
It's going to open up. It's going to open up a can of whoop ass that people in this industry don't think. They think, oh well, they make a Schedule 3, then at least we'll be able to do some banking. Well, at least we'll be able to. Yeah, you're going to bank as you're driving your ass away from the local police administration's jail cell because they just closed down your dispensary for selling a product that they claim that the FDA didn't approve. And for all the individual growers that are out there and all the individual people who are providing products that are going on these shelves, that goes away. I mean, I think people need to stop for a minute and recognize the same people that are smoking this in the back porches and out on the lanais and out on the decks, congressional houses across this country. Those same people are going to try to shut this down.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think that a lot of it as well, Montel. It would open up research potentially, and then it still comes down to, okay, so if they were to come down Schedule 3, lock everything down again, can we put the toothpaste back in the tube at this point?
It's just going to go back market. I mean,
Yeah.
take a look at what's going on right now. We're selling $30 billion a year, $30 billion plus and the numbers range depending on who you listen to and who you talk to. It went from like 2001, I think they confirmed that it was $25 billion worth of worth of legal cannabis sold in America. And at the same time that we were selling $25 billion worth of legal cannabis, we were selling over $70 billion worth of black and gray market cannabis. It's just going to push us back into the black and gray market to a place where we've got untested products. We have untested and not viable cannabis products in the marketplace that are going to start making people sick. Then we're going to have people go through another 10 years of, well, see, you're selling something that's making people sick. And we're going to be fighting this for the next 50 years. I would have thought that by now we would have come together as an industry, tried to form some sort of a organization that was trying to lift all boats at the same time. But yet what we're looking at is an industry that is, literally trying to scrape little footprint for each individual and trying their best to turn in others and report others. And, there's so much infighting going on right now, scratching at a little piece of turf rather than coming together to try to make sure that the entire industry survives.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Montel. Again, where we are in Paso Robles, California, it's wine country, but there's a lot of breweries and distilleries. Really, it's almost like a Silicon Valley for craft consumables. And tourism is our biggest market, right? People come here to eat and drink. And there's a lot of breweries, and I know a lot of people in the brewery industry, and they're like, yeah, when we opened up, we had all the other breweries reach out to us, and they're very helpful, right? Hey, welcome to the town. Do you need to borrow anything? Let's get set up. Let's pass customers back and forth. Let's do a tour, get on a brewery tour. Let's work together. Same thing, the wine industry is a bit of the same. In the cannabis industry, I agree with you 100%. It is like herding cats. I don't know why. And I try to work towards, I don't know why there's so much infighting and so much lack of cooperation in the cannabis industry. And locally, I've been a part of starting, 3 different local cannabis industry associations and advocacy groups. I think it would be great for us to have something more, where we could all work together better.
Look, Golden Apple Cannabis is known for its boutique personalized approach. How do you balance scaling your business while maintaining that level of care and attention to detail?
Yeah, Montel, I think that, well, first of all, it's very difficult, right? There's only so many hours in the day and we're all busy individuals. But I think there's a lot of ways in this world to make money, Montel. And if my goal was to just be rich, I probably would have gotten into the finance and money game, But I joke around with folks that I have a knack of turning my hobbies into responsibilities. I got into hacking, made a career out of that. Got into cannabis, made a career out of that. So really it's, ultimately my main passion is understanding cannabis, trying to disseminate this information to, consumers, policymakers, the community, and also try to make the best products that we can. So it's sort of a natural fit to balance things in some sense.
Well, we want to know. Why don't you give out your stats? Tell people where they could go if they wanted to find out more about you. Golden State Cannabis. Where would they go?
Yeah, so goldenapplecannabis.com
Oh,
is
I keep
is
messing up
our
the name. I'm sorry. Golden Apple Cannabis. That's all.
yeah, no sweat. Goldenapplecannabis.com is our website. On Instagram, Golden Apple Cannabis. Those are the best ways to find out what's going on with us.
And what advice would you give someone who is interested in starting their, let's say, their own cannabis business, especially in such a competitive and highly regulated industry?
I think it's you have to inform. I think it's important to inform the customer, build an education program. It's impossible to have a business, I feel, in this industry if you're not an advocate, and if you're not disseminating education. So I think those are the big things. Again, it comes back to if you're just trying to make money, I mean, you might have a go at it, but you probably won't be around for long, you know?
Right.
So I think it's
And,
a lot of, more of a passion project.
sure. And what's your take on the future of the cannabis industry, technology wise, and are there any innovations or trends that you're excited about that seem to be coming down the pike?
Man, so many, Montel. Like I was saying, I was in the tech industry before, and I'm seeing a faster rate of progression of technology in a sense in this cannabis industry than what I saw in the computer industry. So everything from medical applications, medical uses, how it affects us medically, to different consumption methods, right? As an example, there's a lot of our in NATO, there's a lot of our allies that their med units on the war front have cannabinoid based nasal diffusers for when a particular soldier gets a TBI or traumatic brain injury, right? So boom, up the nose, quick delivery system, quick to the brain, help with inflammation. And over the years, we've seen transdermal patches. Aren't you working on some new products as well?
I'm working on a couple new products. I've got a couple of things that are some nanoparticle kinds of mucosal absorption sprays, things like that. Yes, I have been working on some things.
Yeah. So that's a new, right? Nano emulsification. That's kind of a newer thing over the last, few years. So I'm excited. I think that we're learning more and more about cannabis. Terpenes right now have been the talk of the town for the last decade or so. And now we have a better understanding of how terpenes can both, potentiate and modulate cannabis experience.
Yeah.
But we're learning about all these flavorant compounds, all the esters and thiols and sulfurs, right? So it's very exciting. It's almost like, I guess sort of at the beginning of the .com boom,
Right.
for the tech thing. So yes, I think everybody's kind of a little bit nervous about a Schedule 3, but in the back of my mind, I think, man, is it really possible at this point to put the toothpaste back in the tube? Like if they were to shut it all down, yes, there's going to be a black market. No, there was always a black market, right? You're not going to stop cannabis. You could throw people in jail. But if
Right.
that were to happen, this movement's going to start again, probably with more gusto behind it than ever, right? With more evidence than ever. So
Right.
to me, the future's bright. I feel good about it. It's not happening as quick as what I would have wanted, but I think there's absolutely a light at the end of the tunnel. I think I wouldn't be surprised for sure in my lifetime, we're going to see bread on the shelf, at our grocery store that is cannabinoid enriched, bread or cannabinoid enriched products, right? Maybe with CBG or CBC or CBD. But I feel good about it.
Good. If there's one thing that you could change about the public perception of cannabis, what would that be and why?
It would probably be number one that cannabis is very harmful for you because, as we know, it's not. Most people, when I have to talk to with a lot of prohibitionists, and
Right.
and it's weird to me when I start talking to them. I come from the perspective of being entrenched in the cannabis industry, for a long time. Like yourself, we have a lot of knowledge about this, and you know, I was doing a transaction with a customer the other day. It was a delivery, and I delivered, and it was an adult, young adult man, but his mother opened the door, and I was like, "Oh, hello, I'm here for John, whatever his name was." And she looks at me and she says, "Do you something to the effect of, do they get you guys from do you do mental health checks? Why? Because you're delivering a drug to somebody, right?" And it sort of put me on my heels, because every once in a while I do come across someone where it's almost straight out of like the 50s, or even the 30s or 40s, kind of a reefer madness thing. And I thought, we're so far from that, but that still exists. So for me, that's sort of the biggest hurdle that we have is, trying to dispel some of these myths of, that cannabis is so dangerous and shrinks brain cells, and,
There's all
yeah,
kinds of
just
misinformation.
everything. Yeah, right.
What's next for Golden Apple Cannabis?
What's next? Well, we just, we want to grow and expand and educate. Right now, we have our effect categories, and it's a useful paradigm for us right now, right? To be able to describe cannabis and offer products in a way that are not the Sativa Indica hybrid model.
Right.
I don't think that what we're doing is necessarily the end all be all. I think that as we learn more about these flavorants like Tropicana sulfur and the different thiols and these gassy compounds, and we might learn that they affect us as well. That they affect our cannabis experience as well. When that happens, we're going to need a new roadmap, right? Or a new map as to how to describe and classify certain products for consumers. And I would really like to see more of an industry wide adopted classification of products that is easily digestible for consumers. We're doing
I
our
agree.
thing. If other people want to do it, I'm happy to work with them, right? I'd love that. Yeah, let's work together. And again, as more information comes down the pipeline and more understanding, then our program might change. For right now, this is the best that we can come up with, but I'm always open to different ideas, advice, suggestions, guidance. I have a lot of mentors in industry. Robert Connell Clark, I mentioned, Ethan Russo, um, Chimera, Ryan Lee, Mark
Sure.
Lewis, um, Dave Watson, who just passed away, Sam the Skunk Man. We probably wouldn't, I don't know if we'd be talking about terpenes if it wasn't for Dave Watson and Robert Connell Clark. They were doing this
Yeah.
stuff in the 90s.
Yeah.
So, I'd really like, and to your point, I think the cannabis industry has a problem with just people working together. So
Right.
ultimately, that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see more people working together. And next steps for Golden Apple, yeah, can we work? Can we get to the point to where we could help, or maybe we're not involved and we adopt a better classification system, right, for consumers that is more in line with the phytochemicals, etc. But yeah, that would be the ideal pathway.
Shawn, such great advice, such straight, powerful words. I really have appreciated this conversation we've had. I enjoy it. I wish you and Golden Apple the most success, and I hope that more people understand that, that old saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. When we figure out how to come together, this thing is going to succeed. As long as we keep fighting each other, it's going to be a tough couple of years until we get to the next level. But I like the fact that we got people like you out there on the ground doing the hard work and heavy lifting.
Thank you, Montel. And I really appreciate your advocacy. You're somebody that I've also looked up to for the last number of years. I have the understanding, you were very much, you're very much in the public eye to have somebody like you come out and, you know, preach the gospel for cannabis and, give some information and inform people. You yourself, sir, have done a lot for our industry and for the community and the understanding of cannabis and the movement. And I really appreciate you.
Well, I thank you so much, sir. You take care of yourself. You stay well. Love that family of yours, and we'll see you next time. Anytime you want to come back to chop it up some more, I'd love to have you. A great conversation that we've had today, okay?
Awesome. Thank you, Montel. Take care. Have a great day.
Yes, sir. And make sure you continue to tune in to the next episode of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments. Military Makeover is so grateful for the support of Purple Heart Homes, a nonprofit organization that rebuilds and transforms the homes for our veterans.
Our heroes come home with sacrifices most of us can't imagine. As a veteran myself, I've been there and founded Purple Heart Homes to help.
When I tell the story of Purple Heart Homes, it's the freedom to not have to depend on somebody else to do the simple everyday things in life.
Visit phhusa.org/makeover to learn how you can help.